Timothy Dalton is a weird one for me watching as Bond because he's the only actor that I don't immediately associate with being James Bond. They've all played other roles, but Timothy Dalton is the only one that I know more from like Hot Fuzz and Toy Story 3 and 4, you know? And just talking to people of various ages, I don't think that's necessarily specific to me. And in the way that Daniel Craig feels like my Bond and like my parents, I'm sure Sean Connery feels like their Bond. My boss at work, I was talking to him about the movies. He was saying Roger Moore is his Bond. I think Timothy Dalton is nobody's Bond.
He's nobody's Bond. That's the title of the podvid for the week.
Because, and let me explain why that is. It's not only because he did 2 films, because I'm sorry, I love you, George Lazenby, I love On Her Majesty's Secret Service, but obviously like he doesn't even feel like he's in the conversation and who gets to be somebody's Bond, not because he did one film, but because Sean Connery took it back after him. So if you came of age in that era, Sean Connery is still your Bond.
Yeah.
Whereas, so
George Lazenby doesn't have a podvid.
Yeah. If you came of age in the 60s, Sean Connery is your Bond. In the 70s, Roger Moore. In the 90s, Pierce Brosnan. In the 2000s or 2010s, Daniel Craig. However, I didn't mention the 80s, because if you came of age in the 80s, I think that A View to a Kill is like the most 80s Bond movie. And so if you grew up watching 80s movies and you grew up in the 80s and you consider that your defining era of film, I think that Octopussy and View to a Kill would be like your Bond movies that you grew up with, and so you would still consider Roger Moore to be your one. The Living Daylights and License to Kill, they exemplify that early 90s that wasn't really fully realized until maybe Pulp Fiction. That kind of era of film that's like has a little bit of fun from the 80s and is trying to be a bit more serious, but before going like full John Woo 90s kind of late Brosnan or something like the first or second Mission Impossible film. And so they kind of just float in the middle there and don't really feel like they belong to a specific generation. When Bond, for some reason, seems to feel like this thing that everyone has to talk about which one is theirs. I've never heard Timothy Dalton come up in that conversation.
Yeah. He didn't add enough to the table, or at least what he did add to the table was this darkness, which is just done better by Daniel Craig and more interestingly. It's like the one thing he had that defined him is now more associated with a different actor who played him, and the same can't be said for any other Bond, not even George Lazenby, who still had his own distinct.
Yeah.
If George Lazenby had a podvid, what if all the Bonds were lined up like Spice Girls and there's like Sporty Bond and Nobody's Bond and Best Bond, what do you think George Lazenby's would be?
Underrated
Bond.
Yeah.
Nice.
I do want to just point out as well that I know people are going to be commenting on this and saying that they think Timothy Dalton's the best one. Even if you retroactively think he's the best or whatever, I don't think he's anyone's first image is conjured when they say the word Bond, you know? And that's potentially just because Timothy Dalton has had a great career post James Bond, and so I associate him more with those roles.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, I like that. That's good. That's a good it's a good thing to say. I was trying to think of a more eloquent way to put that, but I think that's an important way to look at it.